Good morning, everybody. That was just sort of a warm-up to the beginning of the day. That was our Spock song, just an Eagle song, just to get it going here for the moment. Osium, thank you. We'll be starting in a minute.
Morning, everyone. Just as you're gathering, and we are just a few minutes away from starting, I did want to let you know that the Wi-Fi password is ISC 2019. So ISC 2019 on the Weston Conference Wi-Fi thingy, whatever on the Google Web thing. And I always like to point out Facebook is not necessarily research, so just all right, so just a few minutes, and then we'll have Jesse and I back up here to get us going.
We're going to have one more warm-up song just as people are coming into the room. Please feel free to enter the room and find a seat while the song is happening, and it will be followed by our official opening prayer. Thank you so much. That was Les George from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Thank you. What a beautiful way to begin the day with the sounds of the land that we're gathered on. I'd like to invite Sam George, also from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, to come up and give us an opening prayer to help us begin the 2019 joint gathering, also in a good way. Sam is the great-grandchild of Chief Dan George and has been a support worker in education in Langley for the last 15 years, in particular working with at-risk youth in the alternative education program. He's blessed with 5 children and 2 grandchildren. Please welcome Sam George to the stage.
Osiam, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. First off, one of the problems with being a junior, that's actually my dad up there. He's also a respected elder for the Squamish Nation, but that is my father up there. Anyways, thank you for this opportunity to stand in front of all the respected elders and dignitaries in the room. As a representative of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, I would like to welcome you to our traditional territory. Hope you all had a safe journey to stand in our territory. We've been here for thousands of years. We continue to be here. My grandpa's traditional name was Tetswanu Slahol. His name was changed when he came. He didn't have an opportunity to use his real name for as long as he would have. The medicines that we're doing right now are bringing back the traditions and the cultures. As it was stated, I've worked for 15 years with our youth. My brother for 25 years with our youth. So we've seen how far we've come, but how far we still have to go. So with a gathering of the minds like this, you guys are going to be making the decisions for our youth. The decisions that you make now are going to impact your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. So with that, I'm going to start my open blessing. So I ask Creator to answer these people's prayers, open their minds, allow their ancestors to come. Allow their ancestors to open the door and walk through. Know that you are welcome in Tsleil-Waututh territory. Help them receive the messages that they're going to need to make the day a lot easier. Understand the messages that they're going to receive. And with that, Creator, I say look after their loved ones at home, from wherever the territories that they're from. Look after the loved ones. Look after the ones that are ill, the ones that are homeless, the ones that have the addictions, the ones who've lost the way. Help them come back so they can attend beautiful gatherings like we are in right now. And with that, I want to say, Hosiam, Hoichka, and may you have a great day. Hosiam, thank you. And with that, I'm going to invite my brother up to one more song, just to close our section. Hosiam, thank you.
Gela Kesla once again to Les and Sam for opening our joint gathering in such a beautiful way. I am Jessie Hemphill from the Guaslanakoro Nations, and I'm very pleased to once again be co-moderating the joint gathering along with Harold Tarbell.
Good morning, everyone. Harold Tarbell from the community of Akwesasne, a Mohawk community in Ontario, Quebec, and New York State. And I've been fortunate enough to live out here on Coast Salish territory for almost 20 years. And, had the great privilege of working with Jesse as the Oprah and Phil Donahue of the joint gathering for the last couple of years. That's a generational reference.
I'll take it. Once again, really glad to be here in Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, Squamish territory for the joint gathering. The first one, just a little bit of history here, the first one was held in 2012, and at that first joint gathering, there were 170 participants. So here we are in 2019, I think several departmental name changes later, with more than 540 participants this year. We have 162 different First Nations from British Columbia represented at the gathering this year. That absolutely deserves a round of applause. We also, in the marketplace, have more exhibitors than ever before. And so please, during the breaks, during the lunch hours, and at the end of the day, make sure you're going out there to visit those folks. I really see them upping their game this year. We have beautiful interactive activities and resources and helpful people just waiting to answer your questions and address your concerns at all of the different booths out there. So we're very grateful to have them here. The joint gathering is such a beautiful opportunity to come together as Indigenous communities in British Columbia for many reasons. One of them, of course, is to strengthen relationships between our communities and feel that sense of unity, feel that sense of connection among each other. Sometimes we don't see our neighbors very often, but we come to gatherings like this and we get a chance to catch up. In the breakout sessions, we also have a chance to hear more formally from other nations in BC what kind of projects they're doing, what kind of initiatives they're working on, and maybe draw some inspiration and also get to feel really proud of our other communities and the good work that they're doing. It is also, of course, a wonderful opportunity to hear from folks at Indigenous Services Canada and Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, who will be here throughout the whole conference to share with us things that are happening at those levels nationally, and we also get to hear about provincial and regional initiatives. And so we're really grateful to our co-hosts, Indigenous Services Canada, Crown Indigenous Relations, and then of course the First Nations Leadership Council, who work so hard to bring us together. So let's put our hands together for our co-hosts for making sure that this gathering continues to happen.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we do have a bit of a busy schedule for you, just in terms of the flow of our agenda, in terms of creating sort of those opportunities for information sharing and for dialogue and networking. We will be in this room until lunch and then have lunch next door. Just in terms of our work, we'll do the opening protocol, hearing from our host organizations. Our first plenary at 9:15 is Pathways to Formalizing Self-Determination. So we'll look at some of the unique and distinct approaches being taken across the province here in terms of pursuing self-determination. We will try to take the break at 10:45, a quick break. Again, you'll have the opportunity to participate in the open house outside and the open house that's upstairs. And so just as a quick reminder in terms of the design, rather than going to the departmental building on Melville, virtually all of the programs and services have been brought here into the open house just out here and upstairs when we go towards the interactive breakout sessions. Following the break, we will turn to a presentation and a discussion on Child and Family Services jurisdiction. You'll see on your agenda the number of people there. Our hope is that in each of those, we'll try to save at least 15 or 20 minutes at the end of each of those designated times for some conversation and some Q&A and some sharing from the floor. Following the lunch, we are then in interactive breakout sessions, and so you'll note that the three rooms there, so Grand Ballroom ABC, Grand Ballroom D, and then Stanley Park up on the second floor in terms of the issues there. So some of those, the majority of those are, of course, what we call the CERNA Crown Indigenous Rights focus group, so discussions on rights-based policy and the fiscal relationships, and then the cannabis one is more on the Indigenous services side. You'll note the timing there is a little quick, so we're going to be there at 1 o'clock, and then magically at 2 o'clock we're going to be in different workshops in the same rooms. So we'll do a little bit of sort of time management there, so try to provide 5 minutes or so for transition to, have that first group that does the 1 o'clock workshop, then be able to transition and get ready for the second one, to give you a little bit of time to shift rooms if you need to. And so that'll be, a little tight schedule there, but we'll make that work as best as possible. And then following that, after that break at 3 o'clock, we then return here. So just to remind you of those second sets, so the rights-based policy interactive breakout group will repeat at 2 o'clock, and then we'll look at specific claims and then Indian registration. From a CERNA side, it's the rights-based policy and the specific claims discussions that are more on the CERNA side of the agenda. And the reason I make that distinction is that when we return here at 3:15 to this room, you'll see that it is the heard and observed. So we're going to look at Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada in terms of those sessions that they've had. Really a bit of a report back from those moderators and some of those leaders there in terms of rights policy, fiscal relations, and specific claims. So that's what we're going to have at 3:15. We're then going to sort of do a bit of a softer closing today. So 4:15, we're just going to transition very quickly back upstairs into a networking. It's essentially a reception. We called it Power Time with senior officials. So as many of the senior officials that are available will be present during that hour and hour and a half. And then at a couple points during that session, we will ask these two groups to provide some, cultural perspectives and some cultural entertainment for us. But try to manage that so that there's as much time for you to engage and network and build relationships with the officials in a way, so following up on things that you've come to talk about or may have gotten raised during the day, but in another way to sort of get to know each other in outside of a meeting, so to speak. And so we're really looking forward to that. We'll just do that day today for that purpose, just in the interest of time. And I'll just ask Jessie if she'll finish up with our housekeeping stuff, and she is going to do the Wi-Fi password. And as if you didn't hear it earlier, I always like to say, Facebook is not necessarily research.
Thank you very much, Harold. And while I'm making these housekeeping announcements, if you're looking for a chair, please feel free to come in. I see many empty seats up here at the front, which is often the way it goes. So there's quite a bit of room up here. If you are a registered youth or elder delegate, I just want to point out that there are portions of the agenda that are especially designed for you, and they're marked with the sort of pinky purple elders and youth or just youth banner throughout the agenda. Of course, the Mackenzie room, which is just out and to the left, is your kind of home for the week. And so for all the elders and youth, please feel free to use that room. And as you can see, every day you have your meetup in there starting at 7:30. Of course, there are portions where there aren't youth-specific or elder-specific things on the agenda, and the youth and elder delegates are more than welcome to join the rest of the delegates for any of the sessions, especially when you don't have something else going on. Please feel free to come back into this room and hang out with us. Final note on the agenda, there's a lot more breakout groups this year than previously, and so it's a really great opportunity to curate an agenda that works for you. And so please do go through and review the descriptions and find the topics that you're most interested in. And thank goodness we have this little agenda with a map, because there are quite a few rooms to navigate. Just a reminder that if you are posting to social media, we ask you to use the hashtag #JointGathering2019. And during some of the breaks, you'll see that we have a Twitter feed happening on the screens, sharing some of the information that you're tweeting out from the sessions. As Harold mentioned earlier, the Wi-Fi password, I believe you connect to Weston Conference, and the password is ISC2019. And then final housekeeping note, well, maybe two more notes. The washrooms are just behind the registration table out the hallway. Coffee will be served out here in the foyer near the marketplace, but meals, of course, are in the back room there. And we have many helpers in red T-shirts. I don't know if we have any in the room right now. Are there any helpers with a red T-shirt The lights are very bright from up here. Okay, but we do have those helpers, so if you have any questions or concerns throughout, please feel free to connect with one of them. In particular, for elders in the room, at lunchtime we'll ask you to put your hands up if you need assistance, and our red-shirted volunteers will come and make sure that you can have a plate brought to you or that we can get you the support you need to really enjoy your time here at the 2019 Joint Gathering. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, perhaps a public safety announcement. Things are very tight up here. I'm going to move this plant that's, getting very close to my leg.
It's keeping our wilderness skills sharp.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're dependent on me for the wilderness skills. I did want to ask, show of hands, if you have never been to a joint gathering. Wow. Awesome. Welcome. And so really, when you look at the agenda, it is trying to bring to you in one place that, as much information as possible, as much opportunity for networking, not necessarily always on the floor here, but, in the side conversations, in the breakout groups, so a lot of different ways to access that. So I'd say that in a way, because when we do open the floor, invariably we don't get to everybody, so I wanted to apologize early for those of you who we don't get to. Also, raise of hands if you have an empty chair next to you. There's an empty chair at your table, so just a heads up to those of you who are coming in. Thank you very much for that. All right, with that, then let us turn to our formal welcoming program. We will ask from both the Government of Canada host and from the First Nations Leadership Council. Our first speaker this morning is well known to many of us, of course, having joined the public service in 1991, having really come out to BC in 2001, having served in Indian Affairs, Health Canada, and then now in Indigenous Services Canada. Please help me welcome the Regional Director General, BC Region, Catherine Lappe.
Thanks for moving that plant. Yes. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 7th Annual Joint Gathering. It's great to see many familiar faces, but also great to see that there are many of you that are new, and hopefully you'll find the next few days to be productive, and you'll get to meet lots of people and learn lots from other First Nations and from Government of Canada officials. So my thanks first to Sam George for the opening prayer and welcoming us here. It's great to be on the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and appreciate that we're able to do our work here. So on behalf of Indigenous Services Canada, and we are out here in full force, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the elders, chiefs and council, youth, staff from First Nations, officials from other federal government departments, provincial ministries, and other delegates who've joined us here today. On the Indigenous Services Canada side, I want to acknowledge that we have Linda Claremont, the Senior ADM for Regional Operations, and Joanne Wilkinson, the ADM of Child and Family Services here. Somewhere, maybe in the room or coming soon, is Paul Topple, our Chief Financial and Results Delivery Officer, so that's the guy with the money. And later this morning, we should be seeing our Deputy Minister arriving as well. So we've got a strong contingent of senior folks from Ottawa that enjoy coming out here and hearing from all of you on the issues that are most important to you. I want to also thank Naut'sa Tribal Council for helping us get this up and running. Every year, as people have said, it gets bigger and better, so there's lots of details to attend to. It's great to have Harold and Jesse back here facilitating, and of course, my heartfelt thanks to the Leadership Council for continuing to be our co-hosts in this event. On a personal note, I wanted to acknowledge something, but I think those individuals aren't in the room, but it would seem to me that I'd be remiss if not acknowledging the fact that over the last year that Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, Grand Chief Ed John, and Bob Chamberlain all had health issues, and that we're very appreciative that they're back and in full form here. We certainly count on their leadership, their integrity, and their vision, and we have a lot more to accomplish together, so I'm really grateful that we have the three of them back with us. We'll also just talk about the conference a little bit. As people have acknowledged, each year the joint gathering gets bigger and bigger. We have lots of momentum, and we continue to evolve as we move forward. We're hoping that by the time we have joint gathering next year, we'll have a new name. If some of you that attended last year remember that Cook B. Wilson's given us a rough time about calling it joint gathering, and at a time when we've legalized marijuana, we need to move on to a new name. And we did try really hard to come up with a new name that reflects the traditional territories that we're on. So we would welcome your feedback as well in terms of what the name of this should be going forward. But we are working on it. And so, as was acknowledged, we started this joint gathering when there was one department, and I don't know what the name of it at the time was, Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada, probably. And now we are two departments, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, and Indigenous Services Canada. And we're happy to continue to co-host it together because we do appreciate that the range of issues that you're interested in are not siloed, right? They're not divided, and that our policies and programs work together, and there's lots of interconnection, and we want to support you on your path to self-determination and make sure you're able to provide feedback on the range of issues. As you probably know from the agenda, we have both the Ministers of Crown Indigenous Relations and the new Minister of Indigenous Services Canada joining us tomorrow, as well as the National Chief, so it's sure to be an interesting day. And today, as Harold mentioned, is largely dedicated to CIRNA-related issues, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, for those of you that aren't into the new acronyms yet. I keep hearing in communities, we don't even want to know what your new name is. You're still always going to be INAC or Diane to us, so don't worry us about these new names. And Wednesday and Thursday will largely be focused on Indigenous and Service Canada issues, which will be sort of more service transformation issues. And our brand new minister, the Honourable Seamus O'Regan, will be joining us tomorrow on day 10 of his portfolio. So you can see that he certainly heard the message very early on about how important it is for him to come here and join all of you at Joint Gathering. And it'll be really an opportunity for you early in his portfolio to give him feedback on what you think he should be focusing on, what you think the key priorities are, and I know he welcomes the opportunity to hear from you on that. So we have a very exciting agenda this year with some innovation to ensure that we're best targeting topics to your interests. In our plenary sessions, we'll be discussing big transformational items such as the new fiscal relationship in child and family services, and at the same time, we'll be presenting more detailed program and perhaps more technical information in the breakout sessions in parallel. As Jesse said, this allows you to curate your own interests and align where you're going to, what your responsibilities and interests are, and allows us to cover more topics, because one of the things that we struggle with every year is that there are so many topics and trying to squeeze it all into what seems like a long period of time, but very quickly gets filled up. So since we met last year, we once again had a record-breaking wildfire season, as well as significant flooding, landslides, and windstorms. Tomorrow's emergency management panel, where we'll hear from a number of chiefs who have had direct experience, will be an important way for us to get some of their recommendations to plan ahead and chart a course forward for how we want to work together to address what is unfortunately becoming a more regular cycle of activities. I'd like to also acknowledge the resiliency of these communities, your communities that have encountered wildfires, floods, and other events over the last few years, and the work that's been done to recover at all levels, and your partnership in working with us and the provincial government to improve the system. So I'm going to acknowledge here our Twitter wall that is supposed to be up here somewhere. And as Jesse has said, it's hashtag Joint Gathering 2019. So I hope you'll join us in sharing some conversations there and getting that going. As was also mentioned, we've enlarged the number of elders and youth here in attendance We all know the value of having representation from both these areas of your community present, and look forward to hearing from them over the course of the days. We've created a youth-specific agenda to hopefully engage these delegates and offer them relevant opportunities to learn and share, and hopefully all of you will reach out to them as well and make them feel welcome and included. And most importantly, as I finish up as well, we welcome your feedback throughout these few days and afterwards. The success of this event has really been that you've provided us with strong evaluation and feedback every time, and that's why we continue to evolve the agenda. But we recognize that your needs and interests change, and as an event becomes bigger as well, sometimes it becomes harder to have your voices heard. So please, the folks in the red shirts, our staff that are here in full force, any of us, please let us know what your interests are or what you like and what you don't like so that we can build that in going forward. So, as I said, our staff are here in full force, both from ISK and CERNA, and they're here to hear your community interests and to respond to your interests as you participate in the gathering. So please don't hesitate to either go to the Ask Me booth and set up a specific time, or grab people that you know and sit down and have those conversations. So I thank you very much for attending, and look forward to seeing you over the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I know we have a couple folks still looking for chairs. Once again, if you have an empty chair next to you, could you please raise your hand? And there's quite a few spread throughout the room, so please feel free to come in and find a seat during our opening comments here. Our next speaker to offer some welcoming comments is Chris Royne, who is the Director General for Treaties and Aboriginal Government Negotiations West with Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. Chris joined in 2018. He's a lawyer by training and has spent his career working for Crown corporations and First Nations organizations. Please put your hands together for Chris.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here today and acknowledge our presence today on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. I'd like to welcome First Nation leaders, staff, members of communities who come to join us today, federal officials as well who are joining us. I'm looking forward to discussion over the next several days. We have added a full day to the joint gathering today to deal with issues with which my organization is focused, the Crown Indigenous Relations. In the last several years, there's been an explosion of the range of tables and the negotiations that we're participating with, the scope of topics and the intensity has accelerated. And I think that the participation that we're seeing today is a reflection of that interest in the evolving relationship between Canada and Indigenous communities. We plan to tackle a number of key topics that are central to the evolving relationship between Canada and Indigenous communities in BC over the next little while. Today, for example, we're going to be sharing ideas and discussing issues around self-determination, self-government, child and family services, specific claims, the evolving fiscal relationship between Canada and Indigenous communities. We're also going to be having an opportunity to start engagement on the refresh of federal policies which guide and underpin some of our negotiations. I'm grateful and I'm looking forward to the opportunity of sharing perspectives between each other, hearing from elders, hearing from youth, and sharing with each other in a collaborative way our thoughts on the big ideas that we're grappling with. An event like today doesn't come together by magic, it comes together by the hard work of a number of people. I'd like to thank the First Nations Leadership Council for working with us on designing the joint gathering, ideas on how to structure the topics for conversation. I'd like to thank the staff who've been working very hard to pull this all together and to carry this out. I'd like to thank the speakers for sharing their vision of what we hope to accomplish and where we want to go in our conversations on these topics over the next several days. I'd like to thank the co-moderators as well. I'll be short and sweet. Thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. Turning to our next welcoming speaker, he is, of course, well known to us through his professional work and his leadership work, having worked in the fields of forestry, being actively involved in the business and economic development sector, and, of course, carrying the responsibilities of his hereditary name and also the elected responsibilities as the tribal chief of the Carrier-Secondary Tribal Council and serving just about the midway point of his first term as BC AFN Regional Chief. Please help me welcome Terry Teegee.
Masai Harold, Deneza, Sekuza, Skyza, chiefs, hereditary chiefs, delegates. First of all, I want to acknowledge the territory of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and to thank the elder for the prayer this morning. So it has been a year, 3 months, 9 days, whoever's counting, since I was elected as the regional chief of the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations. And it has been quite a year. I has been elected this year of quite a bit of commitment from CIRNA and Indigenous Services Canada to really develop the theme of this meeting this year, self-determination. And we got to be reminded too, when the ministry separated CIRNA and Indigenous Services Canada, was that the ministry, led by Minister Philpott, our former minister, was to work herself out of a job, was to really a devolution of this ministry and of getting away from the Indian Act. And for our people to take over those programs and those things that really affect our people. And so over the last year, there has been that real commitment to create legislation for child welfare, legislation for language, which will be coming up, and also the legislation for the framework recognizing Indigenous rights. We have seen some setback. All over Canada, there's different opinions about the framework. Right now, it's in a limbo, if you will. But much of what we've seen, wide was there are many questions about the framework, was what was coming from the office itself. And many of our First Nations communities across this country had questions and don't have much trust for the federal government. I think here in Canada, here in British Columbia, we have a different opinion, and there are varying opinions. We developed a position, a paper. This is the way we'd like to see moving forward to recognize not only our rights, but the province has to be involved, and we have to recognize title. And I appreciate all those other arrangements that have been made, the modern treaties, and we've heard from them, the 7 First Nations communities that have come together and are really trying to create a space for themselves and really push the federal and provincial governments to live up to those agreements. I call them the 7 Nation Army, and they are really trying to live up to those treaties that they were signed. So with all this commitment and some good work that happened over the last year, I'm really taken aback over the last couple of weeks of what we've seen that came out of the office, and I'm coming to this meeting trying to be as positive as I can, but I'm really left with my thoughts in determining what our relationship is right now with the Trudeau government, especially the fact that, we've seen one of my predecessors, the former regional chief, Jody Wilson-Raybould, no longer the Attorney General. And we've seen the shuffle of Minister Philpott, who has really developed a relationship with the First Nations Leadership Council and many of the leaders across this country. She built that trust up, and she really created this arrangement between the First Nations communities across this country and herself to, have that open dialogue to talk about child welfare policy. And I'm afraid that what the good work that we did do last year is going to be undone. So I come to this meeting and knowing full well that in October there will be an election. So we did have a meeting as a part of what was called Joint Priorities with the Assembly of First Nations and the ministers last week, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And in my speech to Trudeau, I expressed my disappointment because it was the same day in the demotion of our Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, and the cabinet shuffle of Minister Philpott leaving her position and Seamus O'Regan, which is unfair to Seamus. I mean, he's coming into a place where there's going to be huge expectations from this room. There's going to be huge expectations from across this country because of what Minister Philpott developed. So moving forward, I really don't want to see the loss of momentum in regards to pushing forward and seeing it over the finish line of the child welfare legislation, of the languages legislation, and of the commitments that we've seen from last year, February 14th, the commitments to the framework. We in this room wanted our rights recognized, and we will continue to work to have that recognized in terms of the commitments that we heard from February 14th as a part of the First Nations Leadership Council. Because quite frankly, what we've seen over the last few weeks too as well is everything that's being played out in the media, the issue of the land rights, the issue of who makes decisions between hereditary chiefs and councils. That continues to come up, and that needs to be addressed and resolved. So as we move forward, third parties are only going to aggravate this situation, as in the CGLP, and also perhaps the Trans Mountain pipelines. And there could be many more out there. I myself, my background is forestry. I used to be a registered professional forester. Much of the communities that I used to represent out of the Carrie-Sakani Tribal Council and my band, we put up roadblocks. My community put up roadblocks against the third party that is Canfor. I recall several of our communities put up roadblocks because of the use of defoliators, glyphosate. So many of these issues that continue to be brought up time and time again aren't being resolved. So as a part of this, the theme of this meeting is self-determination. We need the proper people at the table. We need a better idea of who makes the decisions and how we can really create that space for ourselves as Indigenous peoples to make the proper arrangements with the federal and provincial governments. And as I leave today, I'm only here today. I go back to Prince George to have to speak to the Natural Resource Forum, and I have to speak about the issues of forestry. And this is another arrangement we do have with the provincial government, is the commitment document. We did get good headway in terms of environmental assessment legislation. We will be moving towards legislation for child welfare, which was the second commitment. The third commitment we haven't done much work on is forestry. So there definitely has to be change in forest policy, I believe, in terms of access to renewable long-term tenures, but more importantly in how decisions are made. And that's one of the comments I made last week to the Truck Loggers Association, and also tomorrow in the next couple of days at the Natural Resource Forum. So there's much work to do. I look forward to continue to work with the First Nations Leadership Council and also with all of you in this room. There will be a joint gathering at the end of March, and this is in regards to cannabis. This is coming out of the Assembly of First Nations. It's to deal with the issues of this new legislation of legalizing marijuana, and to deal with all of our abilities to either be part of it, use it as an economic development initiative, or how to deal with it within our communities as part of our laws. Whatever you're going to do about the issue of cannabis. So that's coming at the end of March as part of the Assembly of First Nations. We're just working on some plans for that. So I thank you. Have a good meeting over the next 3 days and ask questions to our folks from CERNA and Indigenous Services Canada. And thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Regional Chief, for your opening comments. Our next speaker is Cheryl Casmer, Task Group member speaking on behalf of the First Nations Summit. Cheryl is a citizen of the Tunaqa Nation, a member of the Akam community. She is currently serving her second consecutive term on the Summit Task Group and is the first ever woman elected to a second consecutive term. So please put your hands together and welcome Cheryl Casmer to the stage.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Jesse. Gisukyukyut kapiniskit hu sukith kukni nausan miyetki. Happy New Year, everybody. Very happy to be here this morning. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples, and thank Elder Sam George for the prayer and to Les George for the songs to help us get started in a good way. And I think it was fitting that we start this gathering immersing ourselves into culture, as a lot of us are participating in our winter ceremonies during this time. So it's really important to have that connection. I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to see so many people, and happy to know that there are a lot of people out there whose this is their first time being at this joint gathering. I can see that it's growing and word is getting out, that good things can come out of this gathering when we put our hearts and our minds together. And I believe that it's also a testament to your commitment and your dedication to your nations and your communities to ensure that you have input and make decisions in terms of what kinds of programs and services go into your communities. This year's theme is about self-determination. You can see it throughout the agenda. By the way, when you look at the agenda, it's almost daunting. It's definitely action-packed, but I also see that it's also full of powerhouse presenters and speakers, so I'm really glad to see that. But when we talk about self-determination, it's not only about assuming jurisdiction and authority and exercising that jurisdiction and authority over programs and services. I think that we need to make sure that the message goes to Canada, as well as to British Columbia, that self-determination needs to include lands and the resources of those lands. We cannot attain full jurisdiction, self-determination, and authority without a land base and without the resources to build an economy on. So we need to make sure that that message is loud and clear. We're also doing work on jurisdiction over a number of matters, of which my colleague, Regional Chief Terry Teegee, has already referenced, in terms of languages, child and family, rights recognition, and Bill 262. I think it's also important to note, and I want to acknowledge the work of Grand Chief Ed John and his international colleagues in bringing into fruition the recognition of Indigenous languages this year. So 2019 is the International Year of Indigenous Languages. And I think that it's really important for us to take advantage of that opportunity, that world stage, and to be able to lift up our languages and celebrate it and work on revitalizing those languages as well. The launch of the 2019 Year of Indigenous Languages takes place on January 28th, and I believe it takes place in Paris, and Grand Chief Ed John will be attending. In terms of the child and family legislation, I understand that we are very close. I know that when we went into the holidays on a positive note, knowing that work was continuing to advance in the areas of child welfare legislation, the languages legislation, and Bill 262. However, when we come into the new year, we were given a couple of curveballs. And it's already been mentioned that there's been grave concerns that have been expressed with the recent cabinet shuffle. The Leadership Council has yet to have a formal meeting with the new minister, Minister O'Regan. We will be having a dinner meeting with him tomorrow evening, and rest assured, we will definitely be giving him the message that the work that has started already needs to continue. We need to make sure that those key pieces of legislation make it through, and that we can't let there be any delays or obstacles come in front of that important work. We have been working too hard on it for far too long. I think it's also important to note that we will also make sure that we need to share with Minister O'Regan that we don't have time for sitting down and listening and learning. We need action. And unfortunately, he's in that position. He's going to have to hit the ground running because we have an impending federal election that is looming, and that window of opportunity that we have to get this work done is closing quite quickly. And we need to take full advantage of the time that remains. But having said all of that, I think like my colleague, when we went into the holidays, I was feeling quite positive. And when I was asked if I would consider doing opening remarks on behalf of the First Nations Summit, I was quite keen on doing it because I was like, yes, I get to report out on all of the positive and great things that are happening. And then, of course, we're all too familiar with what's recently taken place, and I'm like, what the heck am I going to say now? So all I can say is this, is that we are no strangers to challenges. We face them all the time. Governments have come and gone for decades, centuries, but the only ones that remain constant are ourselves. And so yesterday was Martin Luther King Day, and it would be remiss without me leaving you with a quote. He said, "Change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle." And I think that is a true reflection of where we are and who we are as Indigenous peoples on this land. It is from the struggles that we face today. It is the struggles that our ancestors faced in the past that have made us who we are and have made us the strong, resilient nations that we are now and will continue to be in the future. And so I'm very happy to be here over the next few days, very happy to be here to listen to the deliberations that are going to take place and the direction that comes from your discussions that you will give to not only Canada but to the Leadership Council as well. So thank you very much. Dacha.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Just a quick, as we turn to our last speaker for this session, I just wanted to note, I wanted to again encourage those of you standing to please find some seats in the room. There's plenty, again, a show of hands where there's an empty seat, so lots of space available for you. I also wanted to note, we were told that some delegates have been told by the hotel that they need to pay for Wi-Fi, but just want to remind everybody that in the Western Conference Wi-Fi, our password is ISC 2019. So just a note on that, so I apologize for that confusion. Our last speaker on this session is, of course, well known for her nearly 2 decades of experience in leadership in her community on the council and as the chief, and of course her advocacy for the recognition of the inherent title and rights and for the shifts we all need to make if in fact we are to live in a sustainable world. You know, the diversity of her education is not as well known, so public administration, governance, public relations, and media in terms of a lot of production capacity there, also having served as a journalist in her career as well. And then, of course, the number of boards and activities that she's currently involved in is an incredible list as well. But please join with me in welcoming for the speaker on behalf of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, Cookbee Judy Wilson.
I just wanted to give acknowledgement to our ancestors and descendants of the coastal nations for the unceded territory we're on. I just wanted to say I have a bit of a cold, but I'll go through this. I just wanted to be able to say with Sharon McIver with the UN Human Rights Committee's landmark decision calling for the change of the discrimination enshrined in the Indian Act. I'm not sure if very many of you have seen the press release. It was announced, and the committee ruled that Canada must take immediate action regarding the legislated sex discrimination that has prohibited women like Sharon from accessing the same rights to Indian status that are afforded to men. We must acknowledge and applaud Sharon for her decades of commitment for this important human rights work. So I just wanted to be able to, everybody to put your hands together for Sharon. There is an open letter that will be a communique and an open letter that will be sent to the chiefs regarding this important work. But I wanted to say in that letter it's calling for the halt of CERNA's survey because now it's not needed because the decision has been made by the UN and it's actually calling for Canada to make those changes. So why put out the expense of a survey to all our bands? I actually looked at the survey and I was really appalled at it actually for the way the leading questions were and the way it was formatted. I develop surveys and I know about these things, so I thought, wow, we really have to stop this and really put the money where it belongs in implementation of this important decision. So I just wanted to say that so that you know a heads up that's coming out right now. The part I'm looking forward to is the child and family legislation and the language legislation. Those are important work. We worked at co-development as much as we could, but the way the federal government is in their 11 steps of legislation development, typically we're really involved in really only 3 of them because of the way the federal government does legislation. So I think it's really important and overdue, and it's really sad to hear about Minister Jane Philpott's departure. She was really key and instrumental to the work and calling for the emergency meeting, which many people attended and made those recommendations for that legislation. I also wanted to say that, the removal of, our Justice Minister, Jody Wilson-Raybould, was both confusing and disturbing. Is that, it's really not furthering reconciliation. I never understood why Jody, knowing our Indigenous people, our Indigenous nations, and all of our legal landscape wasn't really leading the CERNA work, for the reconciliation and recognition framework. That was led by Minister Bennett, who, really to me made a lot of steps that, just really collapsed that whole process. And, I never really quite understood, why Jody wasn't more in the lead of that. But the federal government's total abandonment, to date with reconciliation and recognition framework and legislation, questions Trudeau's commitments, to reconciliation on his Valentine's speech last year. I was kind of wondering what he's going to say this year on Valentine's, what kind of message that's going to be for us. And also, I just wanted to note, it's been 5 years for the Chilcotin decision, and, our pathways, the declaration of the territorial title, and our pathways forward, must include the recognition of our nations and proper title holders that our regional chief talked about. But it also must include our self-determination of our full inherent title and rights, not only the pathways that the government currently has, for comprehensive self-government or treaty. And I did hear, Minister Bennett saying, that, and I see there's a session next on self-determination. It can't be just built on that old box of, comprehensive claims policy and specific claims. So, there's a lot of outdated laws and, recognition that the government, hasn't implemented, and it takes decades of work, like 5 years later, Chilcotin is still not implemented. The Constitution of the very laws of Canada isn't implemented. There's all of the 150 plus, somebody told me 200 cases now that aren't implemented. So we really have a lot of work. So I hope when you're in those sessions for self-determination, or when you're in those sessions, question the ministers. She said there's, I think Catherine said there's a lot of high-level senior bureaucrats and ministers here. Question them and ask them those hard questions. Don't be afraid, because they have to be answering them, in this day and age now with, the implementation of the UN Declaration. We have to ensure, that we're on that pathway to self-determination. And Canada needs to honor that UN Declaration and implement it fully, including free, prior, informed consent and self-determination. But I can't see that when we're dealing with Unisod and Wet'suwet'en. I cannot see how they're implementing that fully. And also, I can't see how they're implementing that with the Trans Mountain pipeline that's crossing our territory. So they can't be selective. So they have to implement it fully and squarely across the board, not selectively at their own interests. So that's the other big part of, federal government. They have to be like everybody else. They have to implement it all together and not just parts of it. It's the UN Declaration was meant to be fully implemented, and we have to be able to, as nations, hold them to that, and we have to be able to say that's what the true reconciliation is for our nations. And the hereditary chiefs at Wet'suwet'en, we were there, Grand Chief Stewart and I were up there on last Wednesday, and if you could hear the hereditary chiefs talk about the land, the water, and the people, and their inherent responsibilities. And I was saying, we all have them in all of our nations to take care of the water, because who are we without the land? Who are we without the water? Who are we without the salmon? Who are we without our nations and people to take care of? We have to be able to lead that change for climate change and global warming. It's here. I heard Catherine speak about all the flooding. We go right from flooding to fires now. That's really important to know that we're right in the middle of all of that now. And if our Indigenous knowledge and our Indigenous people can't lead that change, we have to change that path. It can't be just built on, the corporate structure and just, about money. It has to include how we're taking care of the lands and the water. That's so critical to our nations, and a lot of our origin stories come from that, and a lot of that, our connection to the language and connection to who we are built on that. So I'd like to say that, and I always don't want to be the one that bring you down, but we have to have our eyes wide open as we're moving forward and what this relationship with the federal government's going to be. And I get kind of tired of the federal government leading it. I want our nations to lead it, because it's only you can do your self-determination, only you can define your nations, only you can define your own Indigenous laws. It can't be Canada dictating what their laws are going to be to us. And it's time for us to do that. Time is now, because we have everything coming in alignment for the first time in a long time, and we have it. We need to be the drivers. Cook's Jamin, thank you.
Gaila Kisla, Cook P. Wilson, and all of our speakers. Let's put our hands together one more time for the folks that gave us those opening comments. It's so helpful, especially for those of us that may be new to some of these issues, to hear from the Leadership Council, hear from folks representing Canada, to give us some context and some background that will help guide our discussions over the next few days. We're going to roll right into our first plenary of the day, which is titled Pathways to Formalizing Self-Determination. And I'm going to invite our speakers to come on up while I'm giving opening remarks here. So we have Joe Wild on behalf of CERNAC, the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister for Treaties and Aboriginal Government. We also welcome to the stage Tanya Corbett, who is a member of the Executive Council for the Tsawwassen First Nation, Alexander Chartrand, who is the treaty negotiator for the Wikinuke Nation, and Doug White, chief negotiator for the Lake Babine First Nation. Please come on up to the stage, and let's give our speakers a round of applause as they come on up. As we know, Canada and Indigenous groups are developing approaches to implementing a recognition-based approach to our Indigenous rights at various treaty and RIRSD tables. And RIRSD stands for Recognition of Indigenous Rights and Self-Determination, if you hear that acronym come up. We know that solutions need to be tailored uniquely to the needs of each of our communities, and so we're really glad to have a variety of speakers up here this morning. In addition to Joe, we have 3 First Nation representatives to talk about their respective visions for formalizing self-determination. They come from different geographical regions, and they also represent differing relationships with the Crown. So we have a treaty signatory, a group that's currently in treaty negotiations, and a group engaged in those RIRSD negotiations. I'm going to invite Joe Wild up first to give us an opening remarks, and then we have maybe roughly 10 minutes to hear from each of our other 3 speakers, and hopefully there will be at least a bit of time left at the end for a bit of Q&A before we go to our morning break. So please come on up, Joe Wild, to give us some opening remarks.
Good morning, everybody. I want to start by acknowledging, recognizing, and thanking the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam peoples for allowing us to have this meeting today on their lands. I also want to thank Elder Sam George for the welcome and prayer, and Les George for the songs. And I want to give a big thanks to all of the organizers, always appreciative of the effort it takes to put together an event of this size. It's not easy, and I think it's a great example of partnership between the Government of Canada and the Leadership Council. So I thank everybody who's been involved in putting that together. Also appreciative of the amount of time we're going to get today to talk about self-determination. This is a topic that is near and dear to, I think, all of our hearts, and I do want to thank all of the opening remarks that were provided by various folks this morning. I think there's a lot of important messages in there, not the least of which is that the pathway to self-determination is for Indigenous peoples to define. This is not the job of the Government of Canada to define that pathway. Our job is to sit in partnership with you to help and assist in whatever way we can on whatever that pathway looks like for you. I know that we have, for many decades not had that understanding. For many decades there's been issues in approaches with government policy, etc. And I think we are trying to make, or starting to make, some progress towards addressing a lot of those challenges. So I'm going to try to keep this somewhat concise because I do want to leave as much time as possible for my fellow panelists, because I think that hearing from those that are either in a process or have gone through the process is going to be far more edifying than just listening to me talk about policy and where we want to try to go on some things. But I do want to note, I guess, a couple of things, and I know it's been a year of, 2018 was a year of kind of ups and downs in a lot of ways. I think it's really important to note and to acknowledge all of the work that was done here in British Columbia by the chiefs, councillors, and people on the ground in response to our process that we had launched around engaging on developing a framework for the recognition and implementation of Indigenous rights and title. I know that that work hasn't necessarily culminated in the way that everyone had hoped, but I don't want anyone to think that the work that was done here in British Columbia is wasted or sitting on a shelf. The drafting instructions and the memorandum that were prepared here are very important pieces. They are things that we are going to continue to look to as we try to find a way to move forward. And, I think a start of that conversation is that we are committed to overhauling and replacing the outdated federal comprehensive land claims and inherent right policies. And we want to put in their place a policy that comes from a place of recognition, but that is focused on creating the space for your pathways to self-determination. A lot of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years has been at tables, all kinds of different tables across the country. We have over 125 tables across the country now. There's over 70 tables in British Columbia alone that are active, and each one of those tables represents a specific First Nations or group of First Nations perspectives on what they think self-determination means to them. And there is, I think, nothing more encouraging than seeing the amount of innovation, creativity, and I think more importantly, those First Nations that are leading through their traditional governance systems, their laws, and having that conversation with Canada and with British Columbia about how we are going to work together to ensure that those traditional decision-making systems, that those Indigenous laws can be respected in the exercise of jurisdiction by that First Nation government. So there's a lot of significant work that I think we have done in order to try to advance the work at tables. And the reason why we need to replace the comprehensive land claim and inherent right policies aren't just because they're outdated, they haven't kept up with case law and so on, but also those policies have at the very core of their foundation challenges with respect to their perspective, and that they are not about creating the space for Indigenous peoples to determine for themselves what their pathway to self-determination looks like. They are about saying that we think self-government looks like this, and you need to fit within it, and that's a problem. They don't come from a place of recognition and implementation of rights and title, and that's a problem. So over the last few years, through the tables that we have been at throughout British Columbia and the rest of the country, I think we have managed to develop a number of approaches to reform the challenges that those policies have presented. The issue is that we've never gone back and rewritten those policies to reflect the things that we have changed on the ground over the last couple of years. And there's a couple of key documents that I would just note as we go down this path. One of which is, recently there was a principles accord that was signed by the tripartite, by the three parties to the BC Treaty process. The First Nation Summit, represented by Grand Chief Ed John, Cheryl Casimir, and Robert Phillips. The Government of British Columbia, represented by Minister Fraser, and the Government of Canada, represented by Minister Bennett, all signed an accord that reiterated that the BC Treaty process going forward is grounded on the basis of recognition and implementation of rights and title, creating the space that we need to ensure that we have co-development as the core of our approach, that it's no longer about prefabricated mandates or policies of the Government of Canada dictating the parameters around which we're going to have the conversation on self-determination. That it is about how we actually sit at a table and have a conversation based on your particular pathway to self-determination and what are the things that we're going to need to do in order to be able to implement that. So why do we need to replace the comprehensive land claims and inherent right policies? Is because, as my minister would say, myself, my team, the negotiators are operating in essence without a net. When we're having those conversations right now that we do at so many tables where we are starting from a blank page and building together the mandate that we need to go back into cabinet for, there is absolutely nothing within the federal system and policy that supports the way we're doing that work, other than the fact that we have a series of cabinet decisions agreeing that we can do work this way. So in order to be able to give, I guess I would put it this way, to, as my minister calls it, to have a net, to have a safety net that, upholds the work that we are trying to do, that ensures that going forward, we are not going to slip back into a prescriptive approach. We need to revamp these policies so that they reflect that way of working. And I'm going to come to a minute, I'll mention in a minute some of the things that we're already doing and that this, and what I think that means in terms of a foundation for these new policies. But in order to develop these new policies, we of course do need to engage. And as I noted, it would build off of the work that we've already done. It would be building off of the engagement that we had around the legislation. And we're going to continue to talk about that legislation as we talk about what needs to replace these policies. Some things might make sense for legislation, some things might make sense for policy. The engagement sessions are going to be led by a group of folks, but we're really looking to work and make sure that they are as Indigenous-led as possible. So we are working with the Assembly of First Nations. We will be working with the BC Treaty process here in terms of the First Nations Summit and the Leadership Council. And we've already identified different folks on the federal side that will participate in these processes. So myself, I'll be continuing to work with those that are within the BC Treaty process. And then we've also engaged Kim Baird to assist us in the conversations with those who are not within the BC Treaty process as well. Kim will be leading engagement with Indigenous peoples in the Yukon and Northwest Territories and Ontario. My hope, I guess, is that through these engagements, which will also include our provincial partners, we will be able to come up with ways in which we can ground policy so that we don't have any backsliding from so much of the progress that we have been able to make over the last couple of years. And I think importantly here in British Columbia, there's two key conversations we want to be able to have with respect to that policy that we may not be able to have anywhere else in the country. And those two key conversations, one is around the implementation of self-determination, and we talk about that around the recognition of governments that are not necessarily based in the Indian Act, but based on however you view and define your own governance and how you want that to look and be shaped. And then the second, which is probably the most critical, in which all of this has to be grounded, is on the recognition and implementation of title. I don't think there's another place in the country other than British Columbia right now where we can have a conversation with a provincial government in the room to discuss how we see the process for recognizing and implementing title, how we get to those conversations around shared decision making, around revenue sharing, around how we're going to be able to move forward to address the interests and aspirations of Indigenous peoples around their role vis-a-vis the land. This is critical. I don't think it's anything that we want to shy away from. There were certainly challenges in being able to have that conversation at a national level in the frame of legislation. The hope is that we will be able to deliver something in policy that would be specific for British Columbia to be able to address the needs of British Columbia so that we don't get caught in being tied to whatever happens in terms of the national dialogue on these kinds of issues. So I do want to give a bit of a quick overview around some of the changes that we have been able to make in terms of our approaches over the last couple of years. And like I say, at the core of it, I think, is that notion of being able to move towards an approach of true co-development of mandates. That our approach to tables are very much about this idea that we need to work together to figure out together what it is that we need to do within the federal side in order to support and enable whatever that pathway to self-determination looks like for you and your peoples. One thing that we have done is to try to make sure that we don't think about treaty in this kind of monolithic, one-size-fits-all, one full final agreement that forever defines the scope of your rights. We need to get out of that thinking, and we have already put in place through, again, like with cabinet approval, we have processes in place where we can move away from a full and final agreement, where agreements are no longer comprehensive. They can be topic specific to your priorities, your areas of interest. We don't need agreements anymore to shape and define the scope of a right. Instead, the agreements can focus on how we see the implementation of the right working today, and they can be periodically reviewed and renewed based on how our relationship changes over time and how your needs and interests around how you may be looking at implementing a right may change over time. It's a clear departure from that need for full and final certainty, moving away from that as being the defining or quintessential federal interest. Instead, relying on the idea that we need predictable arrangements, we need orderly processes built within our agreements as to how we are going to address rights as we discover new things about them or as new rights emerge over time, and how we can address those things post the effective date of an agreement, whether it's a treaty, a self-government agreement, or another constructive arrangement. We're absolutely committed to taking stepping stone approaches. We don't need to do everything all at once. We can do agreements in a way that meets the timing and the pace that your community requires. We're looking at how to do that in a very different way. It presents challenges for us in terms of mandate, my system, back home in terms of the approvals around mandate and so on, struggle with understanding how to figure out whether or not we've got mandates constructed in an appropriate and fair way. But again, that's part of the work of this policy conversation we want to have, is to ensure that we are going about that process of mandating in a way that actually works and supports the co-development approach and that idea that we can work and build agreements incrementally based on priorities. We've already taken the step of eliminating the use of loans going forward. We still need to address the forgiveness of loans and the reimbursement of those who have already repaid their loans. And again, we'll have to see what comes out over the coming weeks as the government makes its determinations around the next budget, but we're all hopeful. We have established a new nation rebuilding program. It was amazingly oversubscribed. We had well over 300 proposals under that program, which shows that there is a huge appetite out there for capacity dollars to start conversations around what a nation looks like and how to move forward on whatever governance you are looking for. So, we're looking at how to address the fact that there is such a demand and whether or not we'll be able to secure additional funds to be able to have more governance capacity funding available in the future is another key component for us that we're thinking about and looking at. I also want to highlight that we have developed a new fiscal policy for self-governing Indigenous governments. This is a huge step forward in terms of the bases on which we provide funding under a self-government arrangement. It is a radical, transformative shift from what we had before, and we got there as a result of working collaboratively with those governments. We co-designed that policy together. We showed that we could sit with 28 self-governing Indigenous governments in this country and work out a policy together on something that has been a quintessential area of tension for decades, which is our fiscal relationship. That work is a huge testament to the dedication, leadership, and effort of those Indigenous governments that were in the room doing that work with us. I'm proud of that work that came out of it. I'm proud of how we came together and did that work, and I think it stands as an exemplar for the country about the fact that we can sit down together and work out things that have been extremely contentious in the past. It's about will, it's about commitment, it's about believing in the process of dialogue, none of which came easy in that process. But I think all of which have and will stand the test of time. We have a new relationship with those governments going forward. We have established a new way of working together, and I can't think of any way in which we can stand up and say this is a different way of doing public policy that gets us to far better outcomes than any way we have done it before. And I think what's really important about that work at the end of the day is that it relied on the experience of those who have been delivering self-government under these arrangements for decades in order to understand how to properly base the expenditure needs of an Indigenous government. And it will help everyone who is negotiating a self-determination arrangement with the Government of Canada now. When you see and we work through, and there's a little bit of decision-making left that we're waiting for in terms of a budget decision to have the funds to implement aspects of the policy. But when we're able to roll that out at tables and you're able to see the kind of change that is going to be there in terms of our fiscal relationship moving forward and the conversations that are still to come. That policy is not fully complete yet. We're still going to have further discussions around how to address things like socioeconomic gap closing and how to address revenue sharing. But the promise that it holds already, and that we were able to come to an understanding of what the appropriate expenditure base of an Indigenous government looks like and how to have the space to be able to tailor it to meet local needs, is, I think, a monumental step forward. it is a dramatic shift from the funding that had been available traditionally when we based ourselves off of the funding that was being provided under the Indian Act. And I think it is a huge, or should be a huge incentive for folks who have been thinking about whether or not to exit the Indian Act and to put in place their own governance systems beyond the Indian Act, that, you know what, you're not going to be left holding the bag at the end of the day, that the Government of Canada is still there and committed to a responsible fiscal relationship with you, and certainly much more so than we had been in the past. We've addressed challenges around things like service population and moving away from the idea that it's just about the status registry. There's still more work to be done around that. We have to address it on kind of the programming side of things, but at least on the administration and government part, we've addressed it. Moving to things like thinking about life cycle costing for infrastructure, things we've never done before. So I think these are all important things that, they're a little bit technical in a certain sense, but I think really what I'm trying to get at is the idea that we are committed to working together to develop these policies. And I see no difference in the work that we want to do on the inherent right and comprehensive land claim policies than the work that we were able to do on the collaborative fiscal policy. So I think I'm just going to close by noting that, the work going forward, we do expect to be very much a tripartite process in British Columbia. We are going to continue to, work with the province, given that there's such a willing partnership there in terms of addressing title and wanting to find a way forward on title. And I want to reinforce that we remain committed to ensuring that we have a rights-based approach that is aligned with not only Section 35 of our Constitution, but also the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and that a key component of that is developing and supporting new policies and pathways to Indigenous self-determination here in BC and across Canada. And the important point in all of this is we're not trying to define those pathways. We are trying through policy to create the space to support Canada's negotiators to be able to work at the tables with you and a co-development approach to that. We're not going to be coming to the table and saying, oh, here's what the pathway has to look like. It really is about trying to support that notion that you're all going to have different pathways. We need to be there to support them. We need to be able to create a process within treaty negotiations, self-government negotiations, other constructive arrangement negotiations, where innovation led by you is at the forefront, and that we're there supporting it every step of the way in true partnership, with respect, and as collaboratively as we can. So I look forward to the discussion. I think you're going to get to hear lots of great things from my fellow panel members, and I'm sorry I probably took way more time than I meant to, but I thought it was important to at least set the table around some of the things that we're working on and the approach that we want to take moving forward in renovating our policies. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's so helpful to be reminded for many of the veterans in the room, but maybe brought up to speed for some of the folks that are here for the first time about some of these key developments that you've mentioned that have happened in the last year and prior. Very significant things have happened in this arena, and so thank you for that, setting that stage for us, and also giving us a heads up about some of the new developments that we can anticipate going forward. Some very heartening messages there. And so now I'll turn it over to our next panelist, Tanya Corbett from the Tsawwassen First Nation, who will be sharing her perspective, her community's perspective as a modern treaty nation, the Tsawwassen Treaty. So please put your hands together for Tanya Corbett.
Good morning. Thank you. I would like to begin today by acknowledging Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh for welcoming us on their traditional territory. I am very pleased to be here today to talk about our story at Tsawwassen and our experience as a self-governing modern treaty nation. I'll begin providing an overview of our treaty, how we arrived at the point where we are today, and how we're using the treaty and our lawmaking authority as a foundation to achieve our vision for the future and progress of our nation. Our community is 480 members and growing. Tsawwassen was the first modern treaty negotiated and implemented through the BC Treaty process. We're actually nearing our 10th year anniversary of our effective date this coming April. We entered into the formal treaty-making process in 1993. Treaty negotiations, as you know, are a long, hard slog, And along the way, we made some key compromises in order to reach an agreement. But in exchange, we negotiated what we believe was an arrangement that would provide us the tools to build a strong, sustainable, self-sufficient, and healthy community. In addition to capital transfers, we added to our land base for a total land base of 724 hectares, almost all of it under our legal jurisdiction. And most importantly, we restored our inherent right to self-government. To be frank, not everybody supported the treaty. Some people felt that we should have held out for more. However, in 2007, our membership agreed that overall, the benefits of the treaty outweighed the costs, voting by a margin of more than 70% to ratify that treaty and to seize control of our economic and political destiny. When we ratified, we knew the hard work was just beginning. Between the ratification date and the date that the treaty came into effect in April 2009, we had to develop and pass 23 pieces of legislation. This included our Constitution and Government Organization Act, and to set out the details of our governance structure, including a legislature, executive council, judicial council, and advisory council. It included a Financial Administration Act and Conflict of Interest Act that ensures financial accountability and transparency, as well as a Land Act that establishes the base for land ownership and development in a post-Indian Act world. I'm going to see if I can try and get this caught up to us here. There we go. We created a rigorous process for zoning, subdivision, building permits, and development permits and off-site levies. We created a formal land use plan, which enabled integration with Metro Vancouver. The plan sets out areas for commercial, industrial, and community housing and other residential developments. We also established an economic development corporation that began the process of leasing commercial industrial properties. Together, these decisions have created a rules-based framework that is stable, credible, and transparent, and so sets the stage for our growth on our lands. This has helped us attract high-quality investment partners, mainly large pension fund companies, as we share the same vision of a long-term strategy. To date, we have leased about a third of our 300 acres that we have designated for industrial development, which will have the capacity at full build-out to hold over 4 million square feet of warehousing. Our lands are some of the only remaining industrial zone lands within Metro Vancouver. Late last year, Amazon announced that it will be opening a 450,000 square foot fulfillment center on our lands, which will create over 700 full-time jobs. This is a strong indicator of market confidence in our nation, reaffirming our role as a regional economic driver and a good place to do business. To me, this is reconciliation in action, a testament about how partnerships and collaboration can create economic prosperity for our nation. On the commercial side, we saw the development of the Tsawwassen Commons and Mills shopping center totaling over 2 million square feet of retail space. On the first 5 days of opening, we welcomed over 250,000 visitors to our lands. For us, the treaty has been the key factor for our nation to attract such high-profile tenants, partly because of the certainty associated with self-government, and partly because TFN lands are now within the BC land title system, which is familiar to investors. We have also been growing our leaseholder community, and at present, we have roughly about 1,000 non-member leaseholders living on our lands. And through land lease partnerships between our members and developers, Tsawwassen lands will soon be home to a master-planned, mixed-use community of over 3,000 doors. These residential developments are expected to bring about 18,000 non-member leaseholders to our lands over the next 15 years. And just last year, our team was notified that we recently filed the largest subdivision in North America with total lots of 1,400. Our growth on our lands has presented us with tremendous opportunities, and together the construction of the residential, commercial, industrial projects generate prepaid land leases, training funds and education funds, thousands of construction and operational jobs, and over billions in construction spending. In 2014, we had BC's largest real estate deal of the year, which was also the largest non-resource agreement ever signed by a BC nation. This is an exciting time to be Tsawwassen, especially given how long and how hard we fought for these gains, but it's also presented us with a very hectic and challenging time. First of all, we needed to manage our growth. In order to enable this commercial, industrial, and residential growth, we had to make very significant investments in our infrastructure. We're building a community from scratch. Over $100 million has been invested by our nation into infrastructure to date, and there's more to come. We've also had to invest in our professional capacity. To put it in perspective, when we entered into the treaty process in '93, we had around 10 employees. On effective date, we had about 30, and today we're about 130. Meanwhile, we must also address the very real social and economic needs of our membership. Self-government brings huge opportunities and corresponding challenges for our nation. When we took on lawmaking authority in areas such as education and social services, we also took on significant responsibilities. The new revenue generated through our economic growth has enabled us to make new investments into health, education, and social programming for both on and off-land members. We've hired new staff and brought in new programs and services that were able to reflect the specific needs of our community members. The treaty has also changed our relationship with BC and Canada, creating a new government-to-government relationship. We now engage regularly with our treaty partners on a wide range of issues related to treaty implementation, often to address matters that were unforeseen during negotiations. In many ways, reclaiming self-government has been the most important aspect of the treaty for Tsawwassen. Getting out from underneath the Indian Act has changed the way we govern ourselves and allowed us to set our own path forward. Through the government institutions that we've set up and laws we've enacted, Tsawwassen government has been able to set a strategic vision that reflects the needs of our members. Last year, we were able to break ground on a new state-of-the-art youth center where our children can learn and play in a safe environment with new programs to revitalize their language and culture. We're also moving forward on a new 36-unit affordable housing project as well as long-term planning for other facilities such as the Elder Center, Rec Center, Community Center, and Administrative Building. Our member-focused strategic vision has also contributed to new programs aimed at the well-being of our members. One great example that I'd like to talk about is our partnership with the Delta Police Department. Delta Police has established a dedicated presence in our community, including a community liaison officer to work directly with our staff and engage with members. This program is building trust between our membership and the police officers and is having real benefits. Most importantly, out of this program, no Tsawwassen youth have been criminally charged since the program began. Tsawwassen has also brought new funding for post-secondary education, under which we pay the full tuition and living expenses for any member who is attending a post-secondary institution in Canada. We've also implemented training and job readiness programs to help our members take advantage of the new employment opportunities on our lands and elsewhere. As a result, we have effectively no unemployment on our lands. And our focus is to pursue the creation of not just a job, but career opportunities within our administration and our joint venture partners. I hope that I've provided a little glimpse about the excitement that we have in our nation as we continue on our pathway forward under self-government. I've lived in my community for my entire life, in the same house that was my grandfather's, and I feel very privileged to be able to raise my two children in the same home and in my community. It is a truly exciting time, and as we use our toolkit under the treaty to make progress for current and future members. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for sharing with us some of the challenges, but also the incredible benefits that have come out of your community's decision to pursue modern treaty as a path to self-determination. Some of those statistics are just mind-blowing. the economic development side, but then also how that's been leveraged to serve the needs of your members. And very clearly, that's at the heart of the work you're doing. 0% unemployment, zero criminal charges for youth under treaty. Those are things that many of our communities dream of and are working towards. So thank you very much once again for sharing some of those inspirational examples while also talking about the challenges of your community's path. So let's put our hands together for Tanya just one more time. Next up, speaking on behalf of a nation that is currently engaged in treaty negotiations, we have Alexander Chartrand from the Wikinuke First Nation. Please put your hands together for Alexander.
Yo. My name is Alexander Chartrand. Come from the Central Coast of British Columbia. My Wikinuke name is Hitmas Kas Oaks Humjeet, a name that was given to me at a yakwa at a potlatch, given in a proper manner and handed down from generations to generations. I also like to take the opportunity to thank the Sam George and Les for the songs and the singing and the opening prayer. I also like to take the opportunity to thank the previous speakers, Catherine, Chris, Cheryl, Tigis. Thank you. And there was one more speaker, and Judy, of the union. Thank you for bringing those forward. We are in stage 5 of the treaty process. We as a Wikinuke, we as a people on the Central Coast have a long history, as many of you do. The basis of us as a Wikinuke moving forward, stepping into the breach, you might say, is based on our history, is based on our language, Wikala. It is based, and in particular, in 1913, one of our hereditary chiefs made a statement to the McKinnon-McBride Commission. And to think of what he went through, was going through, as things were changing in a negative way for our people. In 1913, his name is Chief Joseph Chamberlain. His Wikala name is Hayagalas. In that statement, here's some excerpts from his statement. And again, this is our basis of us sitting at the treaty table. He has already given us direction from that statement. And we honor that. We hold it high. And this is part of what he said. I say this because it's very important for us. Quote, we want to get the whole of Rivers Inlet, from Quay down to Cranston Point, the lake, the Wikinuke Lake, and And some of the things that are going through his mind at the time, he's very despairing to see posts going up in the territory. What do those posts mean? Hey, you can't cross the line here. You can't go take your wood out of there. So as he says in here, he was very despairing. And he says, they come to take our logs. I think that all of this is our land. We have heard that the government will take the land and sell it, but we don't want to sell our land here. All these canneries, just walk in, put a notice up saying, hey, our land. He had some questions also, as we continue to ask him today. How did you sell this land? How can you go about selling this land? All this land is ours, and we want to preserve it for our children. And he goes on. If any of the white men want any of the land, we are willing to sell or to lease it to them for the benefit of our children. So that is the basis of our sitting across the table from the Crown. This is the basis of us moving forward and moving away from the Indian Act. Or for that matter, all types of colonialism. All types of colonialism. As I speak to you today, another form of colonialism. I like to say at the table, every once in a while, the Crown did a good job. It helps split families, communities, and nations. And we would like to change that. The topic here, self-determination. What does that really mean? Well, hopefully we're defining it under this BCTC process that we're in. We, as Wiikinuxw, will determine what is happening within our territory. As somebody mentioned earlier, based on Indigenous laws or Wiikinuxw laws. One of the visions for Wiikinuxw is to ensure that we protect the land and we protect the natural resources. It was good news to hear this week through the work of Mr. Chamberlain, that's Bob Chamberlain, on the fish farms. Fish farms have an impact, we believe, on the stocks coming into Rivers Inlet. We need to say, hey, you need to do something. You're impacting our FSC. You're impacting on our fishing resource. Cease. So hopefully those things will move forward, Bob, and have some really good and final resolutions. I appreciate the work that you've done in regards to that. That's cool. I'm looking forward to more work coming from you and really nailing it down. Thank you. As I had mentioned earlier, we want to move away from the Indian Act, separate ourselves. As you may have seen in some treaties, I think one of them was Cliammon, or maybe Monmouth, where they had some of their people burning the Indian Act, eh? Burning the Indian Act is one small step. One small step of becoming decolonized and uplifting oneself and our people to take on the responsibility, to take on the work that needs to be done. And it's no small task. As I said earlier, colonialism is really entrenched. And it's going to take a lot of work. And some of the work that we're doing at this point in time through this process is what we recognized many, many years ago, that we weren't equipped, we weren't ready in a lot of ways to take on those responsibilities, those jobs, and the work that needs to be done for our self-determining. So today, we are working with the Crown, in particular Canada, on a plan to ensure that our people are moving forward to prepare themselves for the work that needs to be done in Rivers Inlet, formerly known as Rivers Inlet, the Wikinouch. I heard Joe talk earlier about some of the modification of Wikinouch rights and title. We have never espoused that. We have never said we're going to put it aside and say, hey. We've always said full recognition of rights and title, full recognition of the work that needs to be done to ensure a Wikinouch stand tall, stand strong. A lot of the fight is not just with Crown, it's internal. And it is a struggle. However, as we move forward on implementing, signing off on the treaty with the Crown, we will now, hopefully, as time goes on, if there's no real big snag on our way that way, is that we will take that control and that responsibility amongst ourselves. And as you've heard many, many times, we will make mistakes, just like any government. I don't know if Canada's made any mistakes over the years, but we will make those mistakes. But we're right there to make those changes, eh? We're right there under our own government. Also, Joe mentioned about renewal. We always looked at some of the treaties back east, in particular, the numbered treaties, maybe even the Douglas treaties. It seemed like they were written in stone and nothing moved, nothing changed. Now we have what do we call a periodic renewal within our treaty to ensure that and for that matter, Canada and BC have an opportunity to make some changes within the treaty, to have that dialogue rather than to totally ignore it. We're also looking forward to a renewed fiscal model with the Crown. Based on the true cost of a weaker government. As I mentioned earlier, we are transitioning as we speak so that we effectively change from the old way, I say the old way, under the Indian Act, under the treaty and implementing the Wiikinol Treaty. We realize it, we fully realize that some of the work that needs to be done. As I mentioned earlier, maybe not in particular, but we're in a very isolated community, by plane or by boat. That's the only way you can access us. So we realize that the transitioning will be difficult. And Joe mentioned also about the commitment, not so much the commitment, but the eliminating the treaty loans. But I keep mentioning to our people that the Crown has a commitment to eliminate them sooner rather than later, but to hold them to that commitment to remove them. When we talk about a Wiikinol, it's just not small pieces of land here and there. It's the whole territory. Quay, Rivers Inlet, Calvert Island, Cranston Point, and a Wiikinol Lake, and all the rivers that flow into those areas. So it's a territory-based approach. 100% of the territory. And some of the authority coming back to Wiikinol, and as I mentioned earlier, Wiikinol law coming forward. Recognizing that our right to our fishery includes our right to decide what we do with our fish. When is Canada, the Crown, going to say, hey, you have a right to sell those fish? That's a struggle, probably for everybody. But in particular, we say at the table, no fish, no final. Recognizing our right to the benefits of the forests, we anticipate that within the Wiikinol territory, all the licensees that are inside our territory, BC Timber Sales, we will take over those tenures, all of them. Period. Because it's one of the easiest and fastest way for us to generate a revenue for our community. But the trees aren't growing that fast. They have taken a lot of trees, as Joseph Chamberlain mentioned. We are also, there's a major park within our territory, an important park to our people, culturally, economically. It was created with us, without us involved. Some of you might know his name, Harcourt. And we cannot go forward again without Dunlopis. As I mentioned 3 main tables ago, no Dunlopis, which is a Wikino name, no Dunlopis, no Driti. And I think they heard us loud and clear. Our main challenge remains the mindset of government, that treaties are done one way and one way only. We continue to push that envelope out and say, no, we cannot. Your limited mandate is really limited. If we're speaking of revitalizing the process, we must ensure that the mandates are expanded, the cost-sharing considerations are done, and policy development create that space for the kind of unique Wikino approaches that we are developing with the Crown at the table. So with that, we as a Wikino, through the process that we have internally, have brought us this far. Again, the challenge is the Crown, and at times their reluctance to really step up to the table and say, recognition of rights and title and reconciliation. Put some meat into those words. Get the sale of fish. Without a really strong fish chapter, we ain't going nowhere. Guaranteed. So with that, I want to thank everybody for listening. Kayana Katsi, away.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for reminding us, among other things, of the importance of knowing our history so that we can chart our path forward, and just what an important role our languages and our ancestors and our connection to the land plays in all of these discussions about self-determination, and how that helps to equip us to pursue a path that works for each of our communities and their unique needs. So thank you very much. Our final panelist is Doug White, who is the Chief Negotiator for the Lake Babine First Nation, a community which is also involved in the recognition of Indigenous rights and self-determination table. So please put your hands together for Doug White as we come to the final 15 minutes of this panel.
Thanks, everyone. I want to ask everyone to stand up for a second and stretch. It's been a long panel. Stretch. My back is really stiff, so I gotta stretch myself. Oh, and my neck. Holy cow. Oh, jeez. I'm gonna give it my best shot. So I hope that helps. Everybody has to sit back down, though. Now all stretched. I want to begin by introducing myself in my own language. Asiyam nasiaya, ainta pek kwalasaltin tani stanemo, ainta pek klishan tani hupachasit, ait na shkwaluan kwanas heitsepka siyam mastimo, heitsepka musqueam squamish tslewa-tooth mastimo. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you all. My name is Doug White, Kwalasaltin Klishan. I've been asked by the federal government, reached out and asked if I could be a part of a panel talking about some of the work that we're doing at Lake Babine. As I was introduced, I'm the chief negotiator for Lake Babine Nation. Chief Gordon Alec and many of his counselors are sitting over here at this table. Chief, good morning. There's been, so I wanted to come and share. I know I only have a little bit of time. I'll try and be as brief as I can. I want to say that we're really in a defining moment in this country's history. We're at a place where there is a lot of opportunity and potential. And the key message is that this potential and the opportunity will only be realized if the people in this room lead the federal government in the right direction. That if you stand up and show them exactly how the world needs to be. And I can see many people in this room that have spent their lives doing that, and I have utmost respect for you. Dr. Elsie Paul, I see from Sliammon. Many people like that here in this room that are like the North Star for us and our work. And what is our work? What is the work of all of the organizations of our province? What is the work of our individual nations? It's to get to the proper recognition and respect and implementation of our Aboriginal title and of self-determination. We know that those continue. We know that Aboriginal title has been there since 1846. We know because of the doctrine of continuity, we know because of our own lived lives how our own legal orders and traditions continue to this day. That those legal orders and traditions structure the way that Alex was named, where his name came from, and how that was put on him, and what it means. What are the rules and laws and obligations about how he's meant to live his life with that name? That is the essential work of our people. It isn't to sit around and talk about it for a generation. It's to do it. I'm now, I got a feeling of midlife crisis. I'm going to turn 50 years old this year. Oh my God. Oh, jeez. I think I better. Where's all the young? Are there young people here? They better get up here and say something too. My God. 50 years old. I remember I was called as a witness over in Squamish at the opening of the BC Treaty process, and I remember the Prime Minister, the Premier, and our leadership, what we had to say. I remember the words of late Chief Joe Mathias talking about what was in the hearts and the minds of our people in that moment. I remember him saying very clearly that we are now moving out of the era of extinguishment and we're moving into the implementation of our rights and our title, and that is the work that we're here to do. Well, that wasn't the work that Canada and BC showed up for in the 90s. It wasn't about recognition and implementation. And so all across the province, this great, enormous province that's larger than the size of California, Washington State, and Oregon put together, 200 nations, the lack of progress, the lack of meaningful steps being taken forward, while the jurisprudence continues to evolve and we win decision after decision, all of the tension that's created by the lack of getting to the right understandings between us creates nothing but a foundation for real conflict and real misery. And so at places like the Lake Babine Nation, a large nation in the middle of the province, a beautiful Babine Lake, 125 miles from one end to the other, an enormous territory, 1.4 million hectares of land, enormous forests, some of the most important spawning grounds for some of the most important salmon runs in the province in Western North America. In Lake Babine, like in elsewhere in this province, we needed to find other pathways, other solutions. And with respect to the work that took place over the last number of years, the work began through making clear in the post-Chilcotin era, which was mentioned earlier, almost 5 years ago, That historic moment when the courts for the first time recognized and legally declared actual Aboriginal title. That was a historic, transformative moment. They had spent 40 years avoiding making such a decision because the courts believed that this is properly the work of politicians to sit down and sort these issues out. This is the work for the hyper-adversarial context of courts. Late Justice Vickers said, "We are ill-equipped to deal with the complexities of title. Go and sit down and please sort these things out." Plea after plea, decade after decade, the court said, "Go and sit down." When was the late Justice Vickers' decision? 2007. Year after year goes by, still nothing done. Until finally the Chilcotin Nation decision got up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was effectively backed into a corner by the lack of political progress, by the lack of proper recognition of title, which they had been imploring for decades. And they got to a place where they basically acknowledged and said, we have to deal with the reality that if we once again do not make a decision on this important case, we will effectively be saying to the Indigenous peoples of this country that Aboriginal title is not justiciable, that Aboriginal people shouldn't waste their time coming to courts to litigate about Aboriginal title because we will never make a decision about title. That would have been an absolutely grim reality. They didn't do that. They stood up and they said, we are going to make a declaration of title. The significance, the consequences are unbelievable of that decision. It opened up a different era. And in that era, what Lake Babine said to the government of British Columbia, they said, all of the existing patterns, all of the existing behaviors, the laws, the policies, your approaches to trying to deal with the impoverished framework of Haida with respect to decision-making and resources in our territory. That grim status quo that's premised on the idea of denial is now come to an end. And we have to start finding different ways forward that are premised on respect and recognition of the Lake Babine people's relationship to their territories and their self-determination rights to make decisions about those territories. So we said to them that AFCURSA is not appropriate. These limited, short-term, minuscule rights encapsulated in unilateral, there's not even a negotiation. It's a take it or leave it offer made by the province with respect to the forest economy of their territory. That is just no longer on. We're not going to be doing that. And so we shifted to say that we would negotiate a comprehensive forestry agreement. And as we started to look and see what the opportunities were between Lake Babine and BC, we started to see how the limitations of short-term agreement models, transactional agreement models, and we knew that we had to start to build something fundamentally different, longer term. And we said to the government then that if we're going to talk about a longer term, we absolutely have to talk about the implementation of title and the implementation of consent. So they said, yes, we will do that. It is time now to talk. I almost fell off my chair when the minister said, this was like in my mind a historic moment, hearing the Crown talk about sitting down to actually talk about the implementation of title and talking about consent. This issue, I remember I was up in Chehalis a number of months ago, giving a talk in the criminal justice meeting. And they had this beautiful slide, an opening slide on their PowerPoint that said, Chehalis, a sovereign Coast Salish nation. It looked really wonderful to me. And I said to them in part of my talk, I said, you need to, I think everyone has to really understand the challenges that we have shifting out of the status quo into where we need to be because of the history of Canada. You have to understand Canadians. You have to understand the history of of Canada itself as a country. You need to understand why has it been so challenging for the Canadian imagination to think about Aboriginal peoples having decision-making power. Because this is one of the scariest notions for Canada, for the Crown, for Canadians, is the idea of Aboriginal peoples having a say with their own inherent self-determination, their own authority. Now, why is this so scary? I said you need to understand that something about Canada. Canada, for its part, has been happy to be a colony for most of its existence. It's been happy to leave sovereignty over the Atlantic Ocean over in Great Britain, the United Kingdom. It was only recently, there were some adjustments in 1931, the Statute of Westminster and all of that, but it wasn't really until 1982 when Canada finally took its constitution home from the UK Parliament and made it its own, that it really arrived as a more fulsome sort of sovereign country. And we still claim, though, to the UK royal family and all of that as the idea of where sovereignty resides and all of those things. So the point that I was making to them was, if Canada has always struggled itself to think about itself as a sovereign nation, if they didn't think that way about themselves, then of course they're not going to think that way about you. And we know how that has grossly distorted the dialogue, the discourse, the politics of Aboriginal rights and Aboriginal title. We know the way that Section 35 became interpreted, that the main framework of Section 35 jurisprudence. It isn't about sovereignty, Aboriginal sovereignty. Every Canadian lawyer knows you don't walk into a courtroom and start talking about Indigenous sovereignty. You get laughed out of the room. You get run out of there really fast. What did they do? So how did this play out in terms of the Section 35 rights that we're talking about? One of the most important ones being self-determination. What they did is they found a safe proxy for sovereignty. Let's not talk about Indigenous sovereignty, let's talk about culture. Yes. Does that sound good, everyone? Is that safer, less threatening? We'll talk about culture. Culture will be the framework of Aboriginal rights in this country. So there's some funny, it's a big shift. This is the big outstanding issue in Canadian law about Aboriginal peoples. We've talked about treaty rights, we've talked about Aboriginal title, we've talked about Crown First Nations relations in different ways. What we haven't talked about in the courts, when you look at the body of Canadian law about Aboriginal peoples, the big smoking hole in the middle of it is with respect to self-government. Because of the issue that we're talking about today, that has been challenging to Canadians to contemplate, that the idea of consent is a scary, threatening thing. So what we've been saying at Lake Babine is we've been saying that we of course have to implement title, we've got to get to self-determination, but when we think about the right relationship, we're fine with the idea of cooperative federalism, that we're coordinating jurisdiction, and that we need to build a proper relationship premised on that idea of mutuality, of a meaningful ongoing relationship that's premised on respect and recognition, and that Indigenous peoples have authority and jurisdiction and have a say over their landscape, over their tidal lands and other lands, and that we're going to have to figure this out together about how to coordinate decision making. And that one important element of that coordination is the idea of consent. So Lake Babine Nation has been pushing forward. Last year, over this past year, the bilateral discussion with the government of British Columbia became Canada joined in. It's now a trilateral discussion. With respect to Canada, I do want to echo too and share a concern, because we are in a defining moment. I think it's clear that Canada is stumbling in some way They don't know how to do this. They don't know how to do reconciliation. They don't know how to do recognition of self-determination. They don't know how to deal with a powerful Aboriginal woman as a leader. We do. We grew up with them in our families. And so the events of the last few days trouble us. Jody Wilson-Raybould put forward a litigation directive on Friday that says things like we have to be able to address the real legal issues of Indigenous peoples in a respectful and an appropriate way. Calder litigation took 7 days of trial time. The Chilcotin Nation litigation, 370 days of trial time. The difference between the two, same issues. What's the difference? The Crown takes litigation as a ground for a war of attrition. In Calder, they admitted all of the basic facts of the Nisga'a people. In the Chilcotin, they said, we're starting with the argument that we don't acknowledge that you even exist as a people. Prove that. Spend 100 days in court proving that you're even a people. So the litigation directive is something that can help to bring things back to a reasonable approach to using the tools that we have as a country to grapple with these difficult issues. The litigation directive was issued on Friday and she was removed on Monday. It's a troubling message and signal to all of us. So I just want to finish by acknowledging and thanking the Lake Babine for the opportunity to work with them in the important work they're doing, cutting new ground and a new path. And I want everyone here to know that Canada's only job in this work is to sit down at your tables and to do what they need to do to implement your vision for your self-determination. They should be there asking you and helping and assisting and providing support for you as nations to achieve your self-determination. Time is up. Time is up, and it is now time to move into that different reality and to create it. So thank you very much for your time, an opportunity to share with you a few thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug, especially for that call to action. And what a beautiful way to end this panel. A reminder that each of us has a responsibility to go home and chart the path forward for our community. Thank all of you for sharing your stories. We're at the break time, so we do not have time for questions. But I encourage you to find our panelists over the break and talk with them if you did have a question you wanted to ask. We have a 15-minute break, so at 11 o'clock sharp, we're coming back to the panel on child and family services jurisdiction. So please enjoy your break, and let's put our hands together one more time for our wonderful panelists this morning.
And as you're taking your break, we are presenting gifts to your speakers, and I will ask the panelists for the Child and Family Services jurisdiction discussion to please make their way to the panel, to the head table about 5 to 11.